Hey everyone, in this video we're going to pick up with chapter 7 from book 1 of De Bello Gallico. So we've been talking about the Gallic Wars and specifically the Helvetian Campaign, right? The beginning of the Gallic Wars. And at this point in the story, we've seen a lot of geography, right? Caesar's told us all about the geography of the region, all about the people. We had Orgetorix, the conspiracy, all these different things. And now you finally have the actual migration of the Helvetii. And we spoke about how they're pinned on both sides, right? To the northeast, you have the Germans and the aggression coming from them, and the easiest route out of Helvetian land is really to the south, but that runs into the Romans, their allies, and the province, right, southwest of Helvetian land. So they have this problem of where are they going to go, what path are they going to take. And again, in the last chapter we outlined, there's really two routes. There's one to the north, right, by the Jura Mountains, and there's one to the south. So we're seeing that they've decided to take the southern route, which means they're going to end up in direct conflict with the Romans, right? Because they're bumping into Roman territory and the Roman allies around Lake Geneva and this area of basically modern day Switzerland. But this is where it's all going to kind of clash together, and Caesar is going to confront them for the first time. Okay, so what we're going to see in this chapter is a couple different loose ends that Caesar has been setting us up for in his narrative, all coming together. So you're going to understand. Why he's told us so much about the people, the geography, all these different things. It all kind of comes into this one point. Okay. So before you dive too far in or keep watching the video, again, what I always tell you, you want to use the read and reread method. I would always recommend that. So when you're looking at this narrative, you want to read it once on your own and write down any vocab, any grammar, anything you don't understand. Keep kind of a running list. Then you can go look it up and say, okay, what are these words? The vocab in particular is the easiest thing to look up, right? Any words you don't know, look them up. Any grammar forms you're not sure of, try to look them up and say, like, what is actually happening here? If you're using a commentary, that would help. But the idea is once you have those locked in, you read the story again, maybe a second, a third time, as many as you need to. And the goal is to be able to read it without needing a vocab dictionary or any sort of grammar commentary. Okay, and once you hit that point, you can feel really confident that you understand what's going on and feel pretty good about the Latin. Because remember, at the end of the day, you're not trying to just translate this; you want to be able to read it, right, for what it is, right? Caesar would be assuming that you'd be actually reading this, and that kind of plays into his manipulation, all the different style we've seen. It really needs to be read. Another thing I'd recommend you do is read this story aloud, right? So if you're a student, find a partner in class, someone that you can read this to, practice your speaking, your pronunciation, and then if they can read it back to you, you're practicing your listening skills. All these things are really good and really the best way for helping you to understand the Latin. So I'd always recommend you do that. Once you're in that place and you feel really confident, feel free to watch the rest of the video. And if your translation is matching with mine, it doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm not saying mine's a perfect translation, but hopefully it kind of guides you on the right path. If you're pretty close and we're basically in the same ballpark, you can feel pretty good that you understood what was going on. So let's dive in. It starts like this, chapter 7. You have Caesari cum id nuntiatum esset, eos per provinciam nostram iter facere conari, maturat ab urbe proficisci et quam maximis potest itineribus rather, in Galliam ulteriorem contendit et ad Genavam pervenit. Okay, so it's a very long sentence, but you have a cum clause here. So you have when this id, right? When this had been reported. So you have a pluperfect passive subjunctive here with that esset. So you're saying when this had been reported, right? Nuntiatum esset to Caesar. Okay, it's going with the dative. So in other words, when he heard about the Helvetii migrating, right? Or when this had been reported. And then you have an indirect statement kind of explaining what got reported to him. So you translate it as that, right? When it was reported to Caesar, it had been reported to Caesar that they, meaning the Helvetii, right? Eos, there's your accusative to start the indirect statement, that they, conari, they are trying to iter facere, to make the journey per provinciam nostram, through our province, right? So in other words, when he hears that they're making that southern route, matura means he hastens, meaning Caesar hastens. Ab urbe here, from the city it's talking about is Rome, of course. When they mention the city, that's where he is. So he hastens from Rome, from the city, and he hastens to depart, to depart from the city, you might say, and he contended, again, it's another sort of hastening verb. He hastened as great as possible. So you have quam maximis potest, right? So it's saying he made as great a journey or as great of marches as possible in Gallium ulteriorum, into further Gaul, meaning Gaul on the other side of the Alps. Okay. So there's a couple things happening here, but one, when you have this quam maximis potest, right? In other words, it's making as great of a march as possible, or as far of marches as possible. Um, it's talking about the distance you could march really with an army. So this is the quam plus superlative, right? So you're saying with the greatest marches as possible, right? Itineribus. But in general, I think in some commentaries I've seen that a normal march is maybe like 10 miles a day, right? If you're marching with an army. If you're doing a very quick march, it might be somewhere close to 20 or 25, something like that. And some commentaries have pointed out that if you do the math, I think this is really covering closer to 30 miles, right? If you do the math of how far it is and the number of days it took Caesar to get there. So this is a very, very fast march, is the idea, right? He's really emphasizing that he's going as quickly as possible. And there's a bunch of verbs here that kind of hit on that. You have maturat, you have contendit, right? Everything is about hastening and going fast. And we'll talk later, but the speed that Caesar does this is really one of his trademarks. Okay. So to finish it off, he hastened into further Gaul, right? Meaning Gaul on the other side of the Alps. So what the Romans call the province is sometimes called Transalpine Gaul, right? It's in southern France. And then you have Cisalpine Gaul, meaning Gaul on this side of the Alps, which is really like northern Italy. So he's hastening into the province, right? What the Romans would call Transalpine Gaul, right? Further Gaul. And he reached Geneva, right? Ad Genawam Pervene, right? So he reached or he arrived at Geneva, you might say. Okay, near Geneva is kind of one way to think of it. So if you look at this picture here, right? This is interesting. So this passage is the first time Caesar mentions himself. So you want to notice that he mentions himself in the third person. We'll talk about why he does that a little later on, right? But he calls himself Caesar, right, instead of saying me, and he's emphasizing his speed. This speed is really a trademark of his, and you're going to see it in all his campaigns if you look through Caesar and what he did, but particularly in the Gallic Wars and then the Civil War after. His speed is something that's really kind of legendary and uncanny. He's uncanny, rather. He's able to do very fast marches. And this is why it's really impressive, no matter what you kind of think of Caesar and his marching, but to get from Italy all the way over to across the Alps into the province that quickly is very, very impressive, right? No matter what you think of this narrative. And that's really what he's emphasizing here. Okay. Then you continue, and he's kind of following up what he does when he's in the province, right? You have provinciae toti, quam maximum potest, militum numerum imperat. Then you have the side note here. You have erat omnino in Gallia ulteriore legio una, pontem qui erat ad Genawam jubet rescindi. Okay. So you have from the entire province, right? Provinciae toti here. Again, this is really functioning. You have the indirect object, right? And toti is really going with provincia, right? So you're saying from the entire province, right? Imperat, he orders a or as great a number, right? Quam maximum numerum, as great a number of troops, militum, as possible, right? The potest. So it's basically the same structure we just saw of quam plus the superlative, right? Quam maximum. So it's saying as great as possible a number of soldiers, of militum, of troops, okay? So he ordered as great a number of troops as possible from the province, meaning he needs to get all the troops from the province and kind of enlist them, okay? And then he makes a side note here and says there was altogether, right, era omnino, in Gallia ulteriore, in further Gaul, there was altogether one legion, legio una. So he only has one legion. I think it's about give or take 5,000 soldiers, right? So he doesn't have a lot of troops. So he's trying to gather as many as he possibly can to kind of complement this one legion. Then you have to supply et here. So and he ubet at the end. He orders the pontem, a bridge, and then we have the relative clause here, a bridge qui erat, which was ad Genawam. It doesn't necessarily mean at Geneva. It's probably better to translate this near Geneva, right? And we've mentioned this bridge before. There's a bridge connecting Geneva over the Rhone River. Okay, so he ordered that bridge rescindi, to be cut away. Okay, it's the present passive infinitive. So he gets to the province. He's trying to get as many troops as he possibly can, and he orders that they burn the bridge. This is kind of interesting because, again, if you thought the Helvetii were peaceful, you wouldn't do this. Why would you burn the bridge? You can kind of see from the beginning, Caesar is treating them as an invading force, right? Burn the bridge, gather the troops. He's not really in the mood for diplomacy, right off the bat. And again, it's referring to the Rhone River here. This is a picture I think I showed you in chapter 6. So this is what you want to imagine. They're coming out of basically the mountains. You have to cross the river. There's a bridge. There are shallower parts we mentioned in the previous chapter, but there is an actual bridge, which would make things so much easier, right? Because remember, the Helvetii are carrying women, children, carts. It's not that easy to just cross a river anywhere. So Caesar burns the bridge, right? He cuts down the bridge, and this is meant to stop the Helvetii. Okay. Then you have ubi de eos ad ventu Helvetii certeriores facti sunt, legatos ad eum miton nobilissimos civitatis, cuius legationes nameus et verucloitius principem locum obtinebant. And then it kind of continues, okay? So you have when, about his arrival, right? So when you can go to the subject is really the Helvetii. So when the Helvetii facti sunt, they were made certiores, more certain. You have the comparative here. So this phrase of being made more certain is really idiomatic, right? So literally it means something like they were made more certain, but it really means they were informed. Is kind of I would say the best way to translate this. So you're saying when the Helvetii were informed or were made more certain about the arrival of him or his arrival, meaning Caesar's arrival. So now that the Helvetii have heard that Caesar's coming and he's mustering troops, when this happened, mitum, they send legatos, envoys, diplomats, basically, ad eum, to him, meaning to Caesar. And they're not just legatos, they're nobilissimos. They're the most noble envoys, and they're the most noble civitatis of the state, right? So the most noble men of the state. Then you have this, again, this relative clause here, cuius, so of which embassy, right? Cuius legationis, so of which embassy, Nemeus and Verocloitius, they obtinebant, they held or were holding the principem locum, the chief place or chief position. What that means is they sent out an envoy, right? So a bunch of diplomats, and the people in charge of it, right? Literally, the people holding the principal or the chief place of that of the embassy are these two men, Nemeus and Verocloitus, right? Verocloitius, rather. So these are two very high-ranking Helvetian nobles, right, who were in charge of basically negotiating and talking with Caesar. Okay, then we continue on, and you have qui dicerent sibi esse in animo sine ulo maleficio iter per provinciam facere propterea quod aliud iter haberunt nullum rogare ut eos voluntate id sibi facere licea. So you have a relative clause of purpose is really what's going on here. So you have this this qui, right, kind of setting off the whole thing. So you're saying who, right, and it's talking about the envoy, right? So who would say or who might say? It's talking about Nemeus and Verocloitius, right? So who would say that, right? You have this indirect statement kind of setting up the whole thing because we don't have quotes here, so we're not sure what they said, but it's kind of setting up this whole reason why, right? So you're saying who would say that for them, Sibi, there was in mind, in animo, without any crime, right? So ulo maleficio, without any crime or any like wrongdoing, there was for them this idea to facere or to iter facere per provinciam, to make a journey through the province. Okay, so they're showing up and they're saying who would say or who might say that for them there was no crime in mind, right? They were without, you might say, they were without any crime in their mind to make a journey through the province. It's just saying that they wanted to make their way through the province without hurting anything or burning anything, okay? And that sibi esse in animo, right? You can say, literally means something like there is to them in mind, but you could say, who would say that they had in mind to make a journey through the province without any maleficio, without any crime, any wrongdoing, okay? So they show up to Caesar and they say to him, look, we're not looking to cause any problems. We just want to make our way through. Because, and here's the reason why. So they want to make their journey because propterea quote, again, you can just translate as because haberent, they had nullum aliud iter, no other route, right? This is an interesting phrase we'll circle back to because we know they did have another route. They're just choosing not to take it. So this is kind of interesting, okay? But they say we have no other way. We have to pass through. Okay, and then you have this at the end. You have this rogare ut eos voluntate, right? So, and they're kind of asking rogare that it be allowed, right, likeat, for them, sibi, to make, right, facere, to make it, right, meaning make the journey, by voluntate eos, by his will. The eos here is Caesar, and his will means like his permission is really kind of what's going on here. But it's an indirect command, is kind of what it is. So it's saying they asked that it be allowed, right, likeret, um, that it be allowed for them to make this journey by his will. So again, they're asking permission from Caesar, saying, "Hey, take everything in mind, right? By your goodness, voluntate, and hopefully we can pass through your territory." So again, we're seeing here Caesar portraying the Helvetii as wanting peace talks, right? By your will, could we please come through? May it be allowed? This is all very diplomatic, which seems to fly in the face of them being an invading army, right? But we're going to come back to that phrase, the aliuditer haberat nullum, right? Having no other path. There is something kind of interesting about that, and Caesar's making him seem a little bit sketchy. Okay, so they show up and they say, "Can we please pass through?" And then you get the response from Caesar here. You have Caesar, quod memoria tenebat el Cassium consulum occisum exercitumque eos ab Helvetiis pulsum et subjugum misum concendendum non putabat dot dot dot. Okay, so Caesar, right? He's about to respond, and you have this because here. So let's explain why. So because tenebat memoria, he held in memory, meaning he not remembered, right? It's basically an idiom meaning that he remembered something, right? So in other words, that he held in memory. It's just the ablative of means. So because he remembered or held in memory that, right? We have the indirect statement because you have the thinking verb, right? Holding in memory really is thinking. So you have to supply that. So because he remembered that Lucius Cassius, the consul, right, occisum, it's really occisum esse, right, is what's missing here. So the occisum esse is saying that he had been killed, right, occisum esse, he had been killed, and his army, exercitum eas, his army, pulsum esse, and you have to kind of supply esse here, had been driven out by the Helvetii, right? Ab Helvetes. So he's talking about a previous Roman army where a consul was killed by them, and his army was pulsum, right? Was repulsed or driven back by the Helvetii. And again, you have the indirect statement here with these are perfect passive infinitives, is what the essay is really doing here. So you have to kind of supply them here. And not only that, his army, misum esse, it was sent or had been sent subjugum under the yoke. Right, and I'll explain what that means in a second. So, because of all this, Caesar's remembering, hey, wait a minute, I remember that time that a Roman army was basically destroyed by the Helvetii. Right, this is what he has in mind. And then we end with this non putabat concendendum. So the concendendum is a gerundive, right? And it's really going with basically essay, right? So you have to supply essay, and maybe I think in some commentaries I've seen the sibi with it as well. So when you have this, a gerundive plus sum, right? It's something we call the passive periphrastic. Okay, and it's often expressing necessity, right? It's something that happens, and it usually has a dative, which is where you have sibi implied here, right? So concendendum non esse sibi is kind of what you're doing here. So literally, it means something like uh, again. So maybe we'll just go to putabat. He thought, right? He was thinking that, right? Concendendum. It literally means something like it is not to be yielded. I think it's kind of how you'd want to put that if you're doing it literally. But the more conventional way to do it is to say that he must not yield, right? Concendendum, right? He must not yield, basically to the Helvetii. Okay, so the sibi here is saying like it must not be yielded by him. Is kind of where you get that dative agent happening with the sibi. But again, Caesar's thinking that because he remembers that Roman army had been destroyed, he believed or he thought putaba that it must not be yielded, right? Or in other words, he must not he must not yield, meaning he doesn't want to give in to the Helvetii. And again, without going too far into the grammar of it, if you just do a quick Google of a passive periphrastic, it's basically like a roundabout way of talking. You'll see what he's doing here. But the long story short is he's not going to give in to the Helvetii, right? And Caesar tells you why, right? Why he doesn't do it. And he's mentioning this Roman defeat from 107 BCE. So the interesting thing here is this defeat is really like something like 50 years, right, give or take, ago. But the way Caesar describes it, it says he held in memory. How would he really know that? It almost makes it feel like Caesar was there when he wasn't. Okay, but he's referencing this defeat, right? You have the consul Cassius who's killed, and going under the yoke is a sign of submission and humiliation. So the Helvetii, and the Romans do this to other people too, by the way. But the Helvetii make the Roman soldiers literally walk under a yoke, which is like that. The yoke is like the piece of wood that it connects, I think, the oxen to the cart, right? And it's a sign of like you're kind of like a pack animal, right? You've submitted, right? We own you type thing. It's a very humiliating thing to have happen. That's what he's referencing here, and you can look it up. But when Caesar says he remembers this, this is what he's kind of mentioning, and we'll come back at the end of the video to why this is a little bit tricky by Caesar to word it this way. Okay, but he decides to reject the Helvetii. Then you have neque homines inimico animo, data facultate per provinciam itineris faciendi, temperaturos ab injuria et maleficio existimabat. So, nor, right, does he kind of think, nor nor did he judge, you might say, existimabat. He judged that people with hostile mind, right, inimico animo, so hostile people, and he has the ablative absolute here, data facultate, with an opportunity having been given, is kind of one way to do it. And it's this opportunity of itineris faciendi, of the gerundive here, of making, you can translate faciendi, of making a journey per provinciam, through the province. So he's judged that people with a hostile mind, and having been given the opportunity of making a journey through the province, right? He judged that they temperaturos, they were going or they were not going to refrain, right? Temperaturos, refrain from injuria, from injury, and from maleficio, from crime. So he judged that by giving them the opportunity to kind of come through the province, they wouldn't actually be good is kind of the idea, right? He judged that they're not actually going to follow this, and that they would have a problem, right? And again, this whole thing is again this indirect statement, right? Temperaturos esse is the future infinitive, so that's what's happening here. So he's judging that these people are not going to be free or refrain from injury and from crime. That something bad was going to happen. Why? Because he's referencing the time where they had defeated a Roman army and humiliated them. Okay, so Caesar gives you his reasons why he doesn't trust the Helvetii. Then you have this last part. You have tamen ut spatiam intercedere posset du milites quos impera verat convenirent legatis respondit diem se ad deliberandum sumpturum siquid velent ad, and then you have id, which is talking about the ides, april rever terentor. Okay, so you're saying, however, right? Then you have this purpose clause, so that a space or like an interval might be able to intercede. So what he means by that is almost to like give a little bit of time. When he says spatium, it kind of is referring to time too, but so that a spatium, right, a space or room, might be able to intercede, to go into the middle. So in other words, to buy a space, an interval of time. That's the purpose. So to buy, or to kind of have this interval of time, do milites, while the soldiers which he had ordered, quos impara verat, right, which he had ordered, might assemble, convenirent, right? So to give a bit of time so that the soldiers which he had commanded might assemble, meaning might get together. Remember, these are the ones from the province. He responded. He responded to the envoys, legatis, and he responded that that he would spend, right? Sumpturum is really sumpturum esse. Okay, so the sumpturum esse, this is an indirect statement. So again, it's the future infinitive. He responded that he would spend diem. It means a day, but you could also translate it as like time, right? Say is really your the accusative setting off the indirect statement here. He, right, the subject. So that he would spend time, or a day, however you want to translate that, Time ad deliberandum. It's a gerund for deliberating or for deliberation, you might say, or for deliberating. Remember, ad plus a gerund is usually showing the reason, right, for something. So he responds and says, "Give me some time," or he would take some time for deliberating, right? So in other words, Caesar says, "I need time." But he tells you the reason is really so he could get his soldiers all together. So Caesar is stalling here. So in order to get all his troops together, he tells the envoys, "Yeah, I need some time to think about it." Okay, and he says, "Si quid velent," right? If they want anything, or they might want anything, quid is really aliquid. They should return, reverentor, reverterentor, rather. They should return at the Ides of April, right? So the id there is really idos, the Ides. April is really aprilis, right? At the Ides of April. Okay, which I think is April 13th, if I remember right, right? Somewhere in that range. But he tells them, hey, if you need anything, come back. This is, by the way, called a future less vivid construction. If you want to get really specific, it doesn't particularly matter. You could still translate this without needing that, but you have that present subjunctive followed by another present subjunctive with C, meaning if, right? So you can look that up if you want. You'll be able to figure it out. So it says, if you need anything, come back at the Ides of April. Okay, so all of this is kind of interesting. Some questions to think about. So Caesar referenced himself, right? And I said it's weird that he does it in the third person. Why do you think this is, right? And think about the trustworthiness. Would it be different if he said, "I did this and I did that"? How does it impact you differently when it says Caesar, right? You want to think about it. It's a bit of manipulation, I would say. The other thing is pay attention to the speed, right? Like I said, this whole chapter is words that describe his speed. That's one of his trademarks as a general. He can move very fast, and it serves him well in his later campaigns. Okay. And this is the first time we really see it. And again, to a Roman audience, it's meant to kind of put them in awe, like, wow, I can't believe he made it that fast. But Caesar could move very fast. Okay. Then early on, right, you have the Helvetian envoys, right, Nemeus and Veracloidius. And Caesar has them saying that there's no other route than through the province. This is interesting because we know there is the northern route, right? Caesar laid it out. They could go north of the Jura Mountains. It's just a tight mountain pass. So it's interesting because Caesar has set us up to know that this actually isn't the case. So if you're listening to the whole narrative, you'd know, wait, isn't there a northern pass? So it makes them seem very tricky, right? Saying, well, this is the only way we can go. We know there's another route. You have to interpret why the Helvetii would come this way. Caesar's making it seem like they're being sketchy, right? They could go north, and he's kind of set us up that whole time with his geography lesson. They're choosing to come here, okay? Another thing that's interesting to point out is I mentioned that defeat of the Romans by the Helvetii, right? This happened decades before, right? I think it's somewhere around 50 years before. But by saying Caesar held in memory, it kind of is misleading. It makes it seem like it was a very recent event. And you want to think about, why would Caesar phrase it like this, right? Why would he make it seem very, very soon and very quick? It's really to make you think like, man, yeah, these Helvetii, they just conquered us recently. They might do it again. They're aggressive. In reality, it's much further back in time than you might think. And Caesar would not, I don't think, unless my math is wrong. He wasn't alive at this point. So he might have heard of it. And he could hold it in memory, meaning he's heard the story, but he was not there to experience this. So it's kind of an interesting way of phrasing the defeat at the hands of the Helvetii as being a reason why he doesn't trust them. Caesar wasn't alive. Okay. And then think about the delay, right? Caesar tells you that he asked for a delay. Do you believe his reasons? Why does he need the delay? Right? He already kind of told you it's to get his troops ready. So this is where you see Caesar is purposely misleading the Helvetii, which is kind of interesting, right? It shows you a little bit about his diplomacy, his generalship, if that's the right word, and you're starting to see who Caesar is as a person, as a commander, all coming into play here. Okay, so if you have any questions at all, I know I went pretty quickly through that, but if you need anything, put it in the comments below. I'm happy to help you or guide you in the right direction. But again, if you can read this on your own and you hit a point where you don't need to constantly look up the words or live in a dictionary, that's a really good place to be. And if your translation is pretty close to mine, you know you're on the right track. And as you read, always think of these kind of bigger discussion questions, right? What's Caesar doing? Why is he wording it this way? It's all a pretty interesting sort of masterclass in how you can manipulate a narrative by the words you choose and how you state things, right? It kind of sets everything up. Because at the end of the day, Caesar has already killed the Helvetii, right? He's already fought them at the time he's writing this. So hopefully it makes some sense to you. Again, let me know if you need anything, but otherwise keep at it and good luck.